ॐ सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम्। ॐ सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. So, namaste everyone. This is our second monthly Satsanga, and it'll just be a continuation of where we left off the last time. So, today I thought, based on some of the feedback I received from you all, we'll probably spend half of each Satsanga going through some specific topics, and then the latter half we can just go over questions that you've either already posed or stuff that you might present during the Satsanga itself. So, with that, let's get started. रत्नाकरद्यौतपदां हिमालयकिरीटिनीं ब्रह्मराजर्षिरत्नाद्यां वन्दे भारतमातरम्. So to briefly recap what we discussed last time, we obviously started with the Mangalacharan. We discussed the importance of the Mangalacharan, about why we begin everything that we commence with a prayer, a prarthana to Ishvara. And then we discussed the essentials of dharma, what dharma the word actually conveys, and we looked at it from multifarious angles. So that's the second thing we looked at. We discussed some of the questions that were posed during the last satsanga, and the relevance of the Shanti mantras as well. So today I figured that we'd start with the basics. What is Purushartha? So has anybody encountered this word before, Purushartha? And what do you understand by it? I'm just curious to understand your background.
So, the four pursuits of human pursuits in life are
Yes.
divided as dharma, artha, kama, moksha.
Yes, that's right. So we'll be looking at what the Purusharthas really are. And so if you look at the word, it conveys, in some sense, effort. And so you say in Hindi, there's an expression called Purusharth karta hai. That means he is exerting some kind of effort. But effort does not necessarily have a direction. Effort is just a set of actions, but it is only actions that are directed in one place or the other that turns it into pursuit. And therefore, the transformation of effort into pursuit is marked by the direction. So that is what is conveyed by the term Purushartha. So one second, if anybody has the background mic, could you please mute? That way it won't come into the recording. Thanks. So the first of the Purushartha is what we call Artha. So Artha are the securities. But even before we begin, let me take a step back and talk about something that is commonly known to most people in South India at least. So if you have studied the Lalita Sahasranama, one of the names of Devi Ma is Ichha Shakti, Jnana Shakti, Kriya Shakti, Padayini, right? And so every living creature in this whole Jagat is endowed by a threefold Shakti. Ichha Shakti, which is the power to desire, Jnana Shakti, which is the power to know, or I don't like the word power, but the Shakti, the ability to know. And the third is Kriya Shakti, the ability to do. And so everything begins really with a desire, right? It is desire that sets the world, the stage of the world in motion, and the actors play their respective parts. There's a certain desire that prompts actions. But you may have a desire, but then the desire is further superimposed upon the desire is the knowledge. That let's say I wish to build a pot, right? The example of the pot is very famous in the Vedas. So if I wish to create a pot, I need to have a desire to begin with, and then I need to have knowledge of how to construct a pot. You have to heat it in a certain way, you have to rotate it on the wheel, so on and so forth. And so the knowledge is also required. And the third is the ability to perform action. And therefore, to create the pot, you require the desire, you require the knowledge of the pot, and you require the ability to give it a certain shape, which is in the form of actions. So these three Shaktis, Ichha Shakti, Jnana Shakti, and Kriya Shakti, are endowed by every living being. And These three Shaktis themselves manifest in the form of Purusharthas. So, with that background, we look at the Purusharthas. The first one is Artha. So, the Artha Purushartha are necessities that we need to meet in life in order to survive. So, necessities can take various forms. You need food, obviously, shelter, clothing, education, basic healthcare, basic standards of hygiene, a profession. All of these things help you navigate yourself in the world, help you survive. And this is what you really refer to as artha. So, artha are the bare necessities. And things such as marriage, desire for progeny to have children, so on and so forth, are also part of artha, because these are something that is common to every species. If you look at it on this planet, right, that every species desires to also procreate, desires to find a partner, desires to make a living, so to speak, right? So even birds, if you see, they wake up early in the morning and they search for food. And so, this constant search for basic security to fulfill one's life's necessities is what you refer to as artha. The second is kama. So, as with everybody in life, once your necessities are fulfilled, once your needs are taken care of, what is the next step? The next step is that you take care of the wants. You'll not begin with the wants and then go to the needs. You'll always start with the needs. When the needs are met, you'll move towards the wants. And so, let's say we are all working. We are part of a professional fraternity. And so you go to work. You require transportation. So you may have a car that might be part of Artha, right? To get a car, but then you may want a 7 Series BMW or a S class Mercedes. That might be Kama Purushata, right? Because you don't require that to get to work, but it's something that would be nice to have if that is what you have a preference for. So let's say the Artha would be that you have a shelter, you have a home, that's where you live, and the Kama Purushata might be you want a bigger home, or you want a bigger car, as we spoke about, or you want a bigger television. So all of these things, whenever you move into the territory from needs to wants, you're moving towards from security to pleasures. So this is the Kama Purushata. Now, interestingly, every single creature in this whole Jagat is involved in the pursuit of the first two Purushatas, which are Artha and Kama. So even if you look at animals, right? So let's take the example of a dog. Dogs obviously will now they've been domesticated, but traditionally speaking, they used to hunt for their own food. They used to be wild. Still, there are many wild dogs in Australia and so on. So these dogs used to search for their security. And then sometimes, if you play with dogs, you will see that they are also engaged in a lot of playful activities. If you look at chimpanzees, especially, and monkeys and dolphins and elephants, some of these, I would say, higher neurologically functioning mammals, they also engage in play, not just in sort of like living their life and going with the bare necessities of living, but they also like to play and they like to interact with others, they like to form communities, they like to have fun, so to speak. And so even animals have the ability to engage in kama, purushata. So this is artha, and we looked at kama. The third we look at is actually dharma. Now let's take a few examples over here. The first is that you've met your basic necessities, right? You've gained a certain amount of stability in your life. Once you gain that stability, now you can pursue more. You can move after some of your desires in terms of pleasures. That's what you can start fulfilling. After a point, you feel that, you know what, I think I've enjoyed myself. I've had a good time. I've reaped the pleasures that life can offer. But what more can I do? So perhaps your gaze starts turning outward and you begin to think about others as well. That, okay, I think I've done well for myself, I've taken care of myself, I've been able to sustain the standards of living that I was comfortable with. But now I wish to contribute. And so, this desire to contribute to others, to create a greater amount of welfare in the lives of those around you, also constitutes dharma. So let's say you have a decent salary and you wish to do some charitable action. You wish to donate to your temple. You wish to help an orphanage. You wish to give some dakshina to your guru or to a Ved Pathshala, or you wish to just do some sort of action that creates goodwill in your family and in your extended society. And this would actually come under the Purusharth of Dharma. Now, when you're accumulating karmas in terms of artha and kama, they usually get earned and spent in approximately the same time frame. Now, of course, there are exceptions, and the ways of karma are very mysterious. But the actions that you perform in the service of dharma, those take an especially important flavor in the form of dharma, in the form of punya. And so the actions that you perform, which are dharmic in nature, generate punya. Some of this punya comes to your service in the present times, and some of it gets stored for later use as well. So, just to put it shortly, the actions that you perform, which are in line with dharma, which create more dharma, are what you call punyakari karmas. And so, this is what dharma constitutes. Now, it is also important to note that for somebody, an average Joe, the average individual who doesn't have exposure to Shastras, will begin with Artha, will move towards Kama, and then will slowly inch towards Dharma. But for people like us who have the exposure to the Shastras, we actually begin with Dharma. That's why I put an asterisk over here. That though, if you look at it from the hierarchical order of wish fulfillments, Dharma comes third on the list. But actually, for a Vaidika, for a traditional Hindu, Dharma comes on top of the list. And one might wonder how is that possible? And here's how. The actions that you perform, but that you refer to as artha, to fill your basic needs, to fulfill your securities, can also take various forms. There could be actions that could earn you an income which are not ethical, right? So it could be you're working for a slaughterhouse, possibly, or you're working for an industry that is heavily into pollution, polluting the environment. So you might decline such job offers. So you will take the necessary actions even in interest of fulfilling your artha, only when they are in keeping with dharma. And therefore, dharma will take precedence over artha as well. In fact, artha is performed through dharma. Same way, if you look at kama, there's nothing wrong in desiring more comforts in life. I think everybody does that. But now, let's say you have a 30-inch television and you want a 65-inch big screen TV. So there are two ways you can get it. You could either work hard, make some money, and go and buy it from Best Buy or wherever, or you could go and steal it from somebody, right? So you can also derive some pleasure by performing unethical actions. You could steal, you could manipulate, you could do this, you could do that. But dharma makes sure that your actions are keeping with the order, that you do not rub against the order, and that you maintain a certain decorum of honesty in your dealings. And so your kama purushartha is also fulfilled through dharma. And so your artha is fulfilled through dharma, your kama is fulfilled through dharma. But then how about dharma? Obviously, dharma will also be fulfilled through dharma. That means that once you have lived a life of ethics, of values, of morality, then you feel even more free and less bound to go and perform greater acts of goodwill. And so dharma continues unabated. So these are the first three purusharthas. Now, it is interesting to note that only the human beings, at least in the context of planet Earth, right? Now, there are other lokas. We talk about Bhur, Bhuva, Suha, Maha, Tapaha, Jana, Satya, all of these different lokas. Life is teeming all over the universe. There's nothing very special just about our planet. But at least when we refer to Prithvi, the place that we inhabit, only the human being is capable of performing acts of dharma. Whereas animals are only capable of pursuing artha and kama. Now, I will make one important caveat over here. When I say animals are only capable of artha and kama, does not mean that their actions are adharmic. Right? So that could be an inference which would not be correct. So though they can only do artha and kama, their actions are still dharmic. The only difference between our actions, which are dharmic, and those of animals is that the human being has the ability to choose right from wrong. We have the discerning ability the prowess, the shakti, so to speak, to be able to make judgment about what is appropriate and what is inappropriate. Whereas for an animal, because they are governed by their instincts, they are completely instinctual creatures. Their desires are naturally dharma because those instincts fall in line with the natural order that is capable of manifesting in the form of their mindsets. Whereas for the human being, we not only have the ability, but we have the responsibility to make choices. And our choices could steer us towards dharma or it could steer us towards dharma. And that is a decision that we have to make at every step along the way. And that is why I say that it is only the human being in the context of planet Earth who has dharma purushartha. That is what sets us apart from other animals. And lastly, let's take again the example of that person that, okay, I have fulfilled my securities, I have experienced a few pleasures, I think I've done my dharmic duty. I've raised a good family, I've taken care of my society, I've done charitable deeds, I've contributed to the welfare of my community, I've done well, and my actions have been laud worthy, they have been always ethical. But now what do I do? I still don't feel satisfied in life. I still feel that there is something that is holding me down from enjoying fullness, wholeness, completeness, contentment. And therefore, we move to the fourth Purushartha, which is moksha. So, there's this phenomena usually when you hit middle age, in your early 40s, it's called the midlife crisis. And this is where many people remain stuck. That okay, they've had a career, but they've sort of hit a dead end in terms of what we can do now, because they are neither too young to have a lot of fun. Some of the illnesses are just about to creep up. A little bit of arthritis is affecting the knees, and a little bit of family disputes. Your children are teenagers; they are rebelling against you. What do you do in life? You've lived a good life. You've lived ethically. You've done your service to your family. You've raised your children well, but you're still not satisfied, and you still can't get through the basic human condition of how to survive in a way where you can be at peace with yourself. And therefore, you begin to ask higher questions. You begin to question the very nature of existence itself, the purpose of life, the purpose of human birth. Is there an Ishvara? Where did the world come from? So on and so forth. So, in other words, you become a philosopher. And when this philosopher tendency, or the tendency to philosophize, directs you towards questioning the nature of the very self, that pursuit will give rise to a longing for freedom. And that longing for freedom is what you refer to as mumukshutvam. And therefore, the pursuit in the interest of mumukshutvam is what you call moksha. And so, these are the four human pursuits. Any questions so far before we proceed? All good?
So, Prashant, I have a
Yeah.
question. So, the very definition of dharma was said to be do not do anything to others which you don't expect to be done by others. Uh, so, that that definition is applicable only in the context of human beings, but not to all living beings, correct?
Yes, because when we talk about, and this is again a very unique feature that is common in all cultures around the world. It's referred to as the golden rule, right? So if you are supposed to simplify dharma in terms of actions to its bare essence, it's do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So if I don't want to be treated badly, it is my duty, it is my responsibility not to treat others poorly. If I enjoy people being honest with me, if I appreciate honesty, it is my duty to reciprocate by being honest to other people. If I don't want somebody to steal from me, it is my duty to not steal from others. Because the same things that we value in our lives are also valued by others. And therefore, we cannot become the cause of consternation in the lives of other creatures around us as well. And this is not just human beings, but it applies even to other creatures in terms of our responsibility towards them. So I wouldn't like if somebody bit into my flesh and ate a part of my leg or whatever, right? But then the same thing is what you call chicken tikka, right? So that if I don't wish to be hurt, it is my responsibility to not hurt others, including other living creatures. So dharma works two ways when it comes to interacting with for human beings. But dharma works only one way when it comes to interacting with other creatures, because the other creatures by nature uh, cannot reciprocate, because they don't have the ability to choose. So, for example, if I encounter a cow or a buffalo, I can choose to spare its life. I can choose to, in fact, take care of it. I can choose to feed it. But if a tiger or a lion in the jungle encounters the cow or the buffalo, it's going to eat it. And that doesn't mean that the tiger or the buffalo, or sorry, the tiger or the lion are adharmic. It is their very genetic disposition that tends to lead them towards these actions, and you cannot blame them for it because this is their nature. Whereas for human beings, there's a greater component of nurture as well. We have a genetic component, but we also have a discriminative promise, an ability to choose righteously. And therefore, every human being, by necessity, should perform actions only when they are in keeping with dharma, to maintain the law of reciprocity with other human beings. Whereas with other creatures who are non-humans, we have to just be kind and compassionate to them and allow nature to take its course. But yeah, as you rightly pointed out, if I am to filter the essence of dharma in a simple form, do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Thank you.
Sure. So these are the four purusharthas. Now, the first three purusharthas is what we refer to as prayas. So prayers actually are actions that will give you some fulfillment, but only to a certain degree and only limited to a certain amount of time. That means actions that fulfill my securities. Let's say I get a house, right? I bought a new house and I'm very happy with it for 15 days, 20 days, 30 days, maybe a year. After a while, the roof shingles start falling out, and then water starts leaking through, and I have to pay $12,000 just to get the roof fixed. Right, so these things can happen. A true story is about a year and a half ago, our water heater broke, and so I had to shell out some money to fix that. And then your lawn gets overgrown, and so you have to go and get the lawn mowed, and then you need to have a security system. And now I have a young daughter, and so I'll especially need a good security system, right? So all of these things, your securities themselves require securities. They require their own forms of insurance, right? You get a car, but now your car needs insurance. You have a human body, but your body needs health insurance. You have a house, you need house insurance. You need insurance for everything. Same way, the pleasures that you pursue are momentary. They please you for a matter of time, and beyond a certain amount of time, they also fade away. And not only that, but they also come with recurring expenses. Furthermore, anytime you acquire something, it takes effort to acquire it, and it also takes effort to maintain it. And then it also comes accompanied with the pain when you lose it, right? There's nothing in this world, I promise you, there's nothing that you are born with that you will also have when you reach towards the end of your life. Nothing. Whatever you are born with will stay with you for a period of time, and by the end of your life, most of what you acquired will go away. And some new things may come along, but it will always change. And along with change comes some element of sadness, disparity. And therefore, even your kama purusharthas come and please you with a limited degree, with for a limited amount of time, and then they leave you as well. Now, what about dharma? We say dharma is great, right? And it is. In fact, in all my transactions with individuals, with people, I always hold dharma as the foremost purushartha, because it is only through dharma that I should accomplish the others as well. But now I have done a good amount of charity. I've helped people. I've been available to folks whenever they need help, so on and so forth. But I still don't feel satisfied in my life. Yes, it gives me some temporary sense of fulfillment, but not lasting. And the moment the next problem comes up, I forget that I was okay a while back. And so even Dharma Purushata is not long lasting. And therefore, when we look at moksha, we refer to that as Shreyas. It is the ultimate pursuit because it puts an end to the very fact of human suffering. It releases you from the clutches of self ignorance by revealing to you the nature of the very self, of the nature of Ishvara, of the nature of Jagat, and shows you beyond any element of doubt that you are not the small, the finite, the limited individual that you've taken yourself to be your whole life. And therefore, the pursuit of moksha is what you call Shreyas, whereas the other three are called Preyas. I should also note that it is only through a dharmic lifestyle that you can even begin to pursue moksha, because the ichha, right? We talked about the ichha shakti, the very ichha, the desire for moksha can only come to an individual who has exerted a certain degree of dharma in their actions. So this is a summary of the four purusharthas. Are there any questions around this? Otherwise, I'll move to the next topic. All good? Okay. So the next topic I wanted to just breeze through, summary level, are Shastras. So what is Shastra? We all talk about scriptures, but we don't really know what they are, what they convey, and where to learn them from, and so on and so forth. So the meaning of Shas actually means to instruct or teach, and Tram is to save. So, Shasanat Trayate iti Shastram. That which saves a person through this instruction teaching is Shastram. So, this saving is not literal. Okay, it's not in the so called biblical sense of like savior and so on and so forth. The saving is that you live a life of misery, and Shastra basically releases you from that. It teaches you something about yourself that you never knew, and it takes you to a whole new level of understanding and self identification. So, that is very important. And therefore, in some sense, it saves. Okay. Now, when you talk about the Veda, it arises from the word vid, which means to know. So the Veda actually refers to a body of knowledge. That's what the word Veda means, a body of knowledge. Now, Rishati Janati iti Rishihi. The one who sees, knows is a Rishi. So we are all aware, as basic Hindus are, that the knowledge of the Vedas comes to us from the Rishis. So the Rishis, in their deep dhyanam, based on the very punya karma that they accumulated through many lifetimes, gain a deep insight into the very fabric of the cosmos, the very blueprint of the Jagat, of the universe. And that which is revealed to them in vision by tapping into the very deep order of the Jagat form the content of the Vedas. So this is very important. And the Vedas are aparushya. So let's say we decide to write a book. You are a budding author and you want to write the next great American novel, so to speak. So you'll think of a story, you'll come up with an idea, you'll come up with a plot, you'll carve a basic outline, you'll fill it with characters, you'll come and depict some events, you'll put some twists and turns and whatever, right? So you will basically construct a story in your mind, flesh out the characters when you write, and obviously anything that you write is a work of human effort and human creation. But the Vedas are unique because they are apaurushya. They are not the work of a human mind. So when I spoke just a moment ago about the rishis, they are not composing the Vedas. They are simply reciting what they have seen in their vision. So if I see something and I convey that as information, as knowledge, I do not have authorship over it, right? It is only something that I have witnessed firsthand and I'm passing it along without any interpretation or coloration of my own. And therefore, the Vedas are the very truth of the Jagat, of Ishvara, of the self, that are intuited by the rishis, that are passed along through an oral tradition. This is called the Shrotriya Parampara. It is passed from student to teacher, from one ear to the other ear. So from the mukha, the mouth of the teacher, to the ear of the student. That is why it's called the Shrotriya Parampara. And this forms the lineage, the parampara of the Vedas. And therefore, they are also referred to as Aparoshiya because it is not created by the rishis. So, this is an important distinction. And finally, just a brief primer. But okay, before I move to Pramana, any questions on the Vedas and the rishis that we discussed? All good? Okay. Okay. So, does anybody remember what a Pramana is from last time?
Means of knowledge.
Okay. And can you define each of these just briefly?
No.
No, okay.
Few I can, but better
No
you.
problem. Sure, sure. So the means of knowledge are ways for us to gather information about the world that we inhabit. So the first means of knowledge is what we call pratyaksha pramana. Pratyaksha pramana is direct sensory perception. So you have the five senses: the sense of sight, the sense of hearing, the sense of touch, the sense of taste, and the sense of smell. So right now, for example, my sense of smell is subdued because my nose is blocked. But otherwise, we have five senses that we are equipped with. And these five senses are like five windows into the world that allow the world to relate information to us through these five windows, basically. So that's what you call direct perception. Now, not all creatures have five senses, right? So some creatures have three, some senses, or creatures have four. If you take plants, they actually just have one, right? The plants actually have a sense of touch. So you have the touch me not plant, for example, right? So plants can also feel pressure. They cannot feel pain, but they feel pressure. And so that pressure translates loosely into a sense of touch. Then you have certain flat worms which have like two senses. Some of them are blind, so maybe they have three, so on and so forth. But we as human beings have five senses. Anumana is inference. So just briefly recapping what we spoke about last time. The second way in which we can gather information is through inference. Where there is smoke, there is fire. I see the smoke on the mountain, but I do not perceive the fire directly. But I can make an inference that because there is smoke, there has to be fire, right? So, though I do not see the fire directly through prataksha pramana, I am able to draw an inference, which is what you call anumana. Now, it is important to note that anumana works only in one direction. That means I can infer the smoke from the fire. No, I'm sorry, I can infer the fire from the smoke, but I cannot infer the smoke from the fire. Because when there is smoke, there will always be fire, but it is not necessarily that when there is fire, there will always be smoke, because you can also have smokeless fire. So, just a technical, logical technicality here, basically, that inference works only in one way. Okay. Then you have Anthapatti, which is presumption. We discussed this briefly, but when you put together multiple inferences in series, that is what you call Anthapatti. So I'll not get into the details a lot, but let's say the classic example, Devnath visits my home every day for a month. Every day that he visits, I weigh him on the scale. His weight is consistently 70 kgs. He goes back the next day, he comes back at 70 kgs again. I assume, I make the presumption, or the at least the inference that one, in order to maintain weight, you need to eat food, and two, because you're not eating food at my place, you're eating it somewhere else. So this is a presumption. I can actually draw a fact from presumption as well. The fourth one is upamana, which is comparison. Now, classic example again, briefly, you lived in India your whole life. You encountered buffaloes. You move to the US, somebody says there's an animal called a bison, but you've never seen a bison. How do you recognize it? The person says, look, think of a buffalo, think of lots of hair, superimpose that hair on the buffalo, and a very hairy looking buffalo like creature is a bison. So you've kind of painted a mental picture of this. So next time you are driving down the Rocky Mountains and you see this shaggy looking bull slash buffalo like creature with a lot of hair on its body, you can draw a reasonable inference that yes, this is a bison. So this is knowledge through comparison. Then you have Anupalabdhi, knowledge through negation. This is very often employed in scientific experiments as well. So for some of you all who follow the news, you have something called the Big Hadron Collider at CERN, right? So the Large Hadron Collider rather, and over there they smash these atomic nuclei at super high speeds, like almost a fraction of the speed of light. And so when these nuclei and protons collide together at these high velocities, they release a whole bunch of, I would say, subatomic particles, new stuff. It's like a particle zoo that you find. And sometimes when they are trying to, I would say, prove their hypothesis, they do so by the absence of the particles that have not come out through that collision. And so this forms the basis of Anupalabdhi as well. And a more, I would say, pedestrian example is I can tell you I'm holding a pot in my hands. But there is no pot in my hand, though I can still make that statement. Now, what's going to happen is in your mind, you are doing things very quickly. First is you're looking at my hands. Second is you've created a mental image of a pot. And the third is that you find that the mental image of the pot does not fit with the reality of there being nothing in my hands. And therefore, you've sort of arrived at the absence of the pot through the non cognition of it, which is Anupalabdhi. And this works very well in scientific endeavors as well. So these are the five ways in which you can gather knowledge of the world. But now, how do I get knowledge of dharma? How do I get knowledge of what karmas I should perform for what actions? In fact, how do I even get knowledge that there is something called karma? How do I get knowledge of the Atma? How do I get knowledge of Ishvara? None of these five, like perception or inference or presumption or comparison or negation, can help you arrive at the truth of certain topics, right? And so, therefore, you necessarily need a sixth pramana, which is what we refer to as Shabda pramana. And this Shabda pramana is what you call the Shruti or the Vedas. And the Shruti slash Vedas consist of the information, the knowledge that cannot be gathered through the other means of knowledge. And therefore, it forms its own independent sixth means of knowledge, which is what you call Shabda Pramana. It is also important to note that none of these means of knowledge negate each other because they are masters of their respective domain. That means, let's take the example of a flower. You go out in the park, you see there's a flower, you can see the flower, right? So let's say it has a bright yellow color. So that is a sense of sight. You can also smell the flower. It has a certain fragrance that you can recognize. So there's the sense of smell. And then it also has a very smooth, silky texture, the petals of the flower. So that's the sense of touch. And then you can also, I don't know, maybe if you rustle it against your ears, you can hear it, maybe, right? So that's the sense of hearing. And if you want to look really silly, you can even try tasting it in front of everybody. So that's the sense of taste. And so the same flower makes it available through different aspects of itself to the five senses. But if you note, neither of these five senses negate each other. They all complement in adding greater level of detail to the reality of the flower that you perceive. If you had even one less sense, right? So let's say you didn't have the sense of smell, then you would lose one aspect, one dimension of the floweriness of the flower, which is the smell. Likewise, all of these pramanas that we talked about, they only complement each other, but they never negate each other. And in most cases, they, I would say, they enter a domain which is uniquely their own. So is that clear, or any maybe questions or discussions on this?
Uh, so Anumana and Arthapatti and Upamana, those three are very close. In fact, Upamana is a kind of Anumana only. Right?
Yes. So if you look at Anumana, it forms almost the basis for Arthapatti, Upamana, and Anupalanti. And what I mean by that is that in every inference, or let's say every pramana, outside of pratyaksha, outside of direct perception, there is some element of brain power that you have to use. And so there's always one or multiple steps of inference that you have to arrive at. Anumana is the simplest inference. It is the most direct and the most basic inference. But the same Anumana shows up in different flavors through Arthapatti, Upamana, and Anupalanti. So that is a very good observation on your part. Because all of those three also require some level of logical inference, except that the inferences only get more complex. The complexity increases, but the inference remains the same. Good point.
Thanks, Vish.
Sure. So let's look at the Shastras themselves very quickly. I'll try to recap this in 5 to 7 minutes so we can move towards the pending questions. Okay. So we discussed the Shruti, right? So the Shruti is a Parushaya. The Shruti or the Veda are the 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 passing down of the vision of the rishis based on the truth that they've intuited of the nature of reality. That is the content of the Vedas. The same Vedas are very voluminous. Initially, you had only one single Veda. But then later on, through the passage of time, it got divided into four because not any individual could remember all of them. So just for the sake of convenience, Ved Vyas, so we call Ved Vyas Bhagwan, right? So he was the one who divided the singular Veda into the Rig, Yajur, Sam, and Atharva Veda. So the Veda was divided into four, and he also categorized them in a certain way. Okay. So if you encountered people's last names, their surnames, such as Chaturvedi, Trivedi, Dvivedi, then it is possible that some of their ancestors, maybe in the very distant past, the Chaturvedis may have memorized four Vedas. The Trivedis may have memorized three Vedas, Dvivedi, two Vedas. Now, there's no last name for single Veda because I think almost everybody knew it back then, the traditional Brahmins at least. So this is how the last name came. It's very interesting. Um, Today, if you ask a Chaturvedi, forget memorizing the four Vedas completely. He won't even know the names of the four Vedas. So times have changed a lot now, but we are talking about a time in the ancient past as well. Okay, so that is a Veda. Now, because the Vedas are so voluminous, you cannot remember all of their content. Therefore, the rishis, out of their own compassion, wrote the sutras. The sutras are for those who've studied biology. Uh, you have these acronyms that you use, but not acronyms. I can't remember the exact word, but they are very pithy statements. Maybe Arusha can help me. I'm losing track of that exact word. That you have a long process that you remember through like a very short bunch of letters, whatever it's called. So sutras are something akin to that. That the teachings of the Veda are condensed in a very shortened fashion and presented as sutras. So one example is Brahma Sutra Bhashya. Now the Brahma Sutra Bhashya, the first four sutras are Athato Brahma Jigyasa Janmadhyasya Yataha Shastra Yoritva Tattu Samanvaya. These are four small little statements. And Swami Dayananda takes almost 235 hours just to unfold these four statements. So see how condensed the sutras are. So that is what the sutras are. They're the condensation, pithy aphorisms. That's the word I was looking for. They are aphorisms of the teachings of the Vedas. Okay. Now you have the Shruti, the Vedas. Now you have the Sutra we talked about. The third is a Smriti. Smriti refers to recollection or memory. So the same teachings of the Vedas in an expanded form through the very memory of the rishis with some greater delineation and explanation is what you call smriti. So if the Vedas are like one sentence long, the elaboration upon that one sentence could take the form of 10 sentences, and that becomes a smriti, the elaboration of the Vedas. Then you have the itihasas. The itihasas are the very teachings contained in the Shastra, in the Vedas, but present uh, in the form of a historical epic through the events of historical characters. So if you look at Ramayana and you look at Mahabharata, all the four Purushatas, the teachings of Artha, Dharma, Kama, Moksha, all of it is contained through the life story of Sri Ram Bhagwan. Same way, if you look at the Mahabharata, Dharma, Artha, and Kama are splattered throughout the Mahabharata, and Moksha especially is condensed within the Bhagavad Gita, which forms the part of the Mahabharata. Now, if you note, I've also listed Bhagavad Gita under Smriti and under Itihasa because though Bhagavad Gita forms a part of the Mahabharata, in some ways we can also look at it as a Smriti Grantha because Sri Bhagwan in the Gita mentions that whatever he is teaching is not anything new. It is not quote unquote Krishna's philosophy, right? It is the very teachings of the Vedas that he is simply reiterating for the sake of Arjuna. And therefore, the Bhagavad Gita comes under both Itihasa as well as Smriti. Okay, so we looked at Shruti, Sutra, Smriti, and Itihasa. Then let's look at the Purana. I'll come back to Vedanga in a bit, but let's look at Purana. The Puranas are even further elaborations upon the teachings of the Vedas in a very colorful way. So, my Guru Pujya Swami Dayandaji used to joke about this sometimes that the Vedas are very inaccessible to people because it is so difficult for most folks to understand. And so the Puranas, whenever the rishis were conducting yajnas and they were offering ahuti, and whenever they wanted a so-called coffee break, they would sit aside, and all the common folks would gather around the rishis, and then the rishis would convey the same teachings of the Vedas in the form of the colorful Puranas. So the Puranas form an extension of the very teachings of the Vedas in a way that is accessible from the youngest person to the oldest person. There is something in the Puranas for everybody, for all age groups, for all preparation levels, regardless of the level of maturity. Everybody will find something of interest in the Puranas. So that is the Puranas. Then you come to the Bhashyas. The Bhashya is basically a commentary. So the teachings of the Shruti are further elaborated through the commentaries of great acharyas such as Shankaracharya, Vallabhacharya, Madhavacharya, Raghunatacharya. All of these acharyas are there. So these are what you call the bhashyas. Upon the bhashyas, you can have some commentaries, right? So you have a commentary, and on that commentary, there could be an additional commentary commenting upon that commentary. And that is what you call a Vartika. Then you have a Tika. A Tika is a sort of a glossary. Then you have a Karika, which is an independent work restating a set of teachings. And then you have a Tippani. A Tippani are like a bunch of footnotes and small detailed points that elaborate upon certain aspects of the teaching. So these form the five, I would say, the quintuplet of the bhashyas: the bhashya, the tika, the vartika, the tippani, and the karika. Finally, you come to the prakarana grantha. The prakarana grantha are such as Tattvabodha, very famous. Viveka Chudamani is also very famous, and there's Drikdisha Viveka. All of these and so many more, which I've not listed, are Prakarana Granthas, which are again independent works of authors that elaborate upon a bunch of topics or try to summarize a set of teachings. So, for example, if my guru today were to write a treatise on a certain aspect or a topic of the Vedas, then that would come under the title of a Prakarana Grantha. So, one very famous Prakarana Grantha is called the Panchadashi. This was written about 700 or so years ago by Swami Vidyaranya, the great Jagat Guru of Shringeri. And so the Panchadashi is 15 chapters that contain the entire essence, the entire teaching of the of the Vedanta of Upanishads. So this is what you call the Prakarana Grantha. Now I'm going to roll back a bit over here, back to Veda. So we talked about Vedas being divided into Rig, Yajur, Sam, and Atharva, right? Each of the four Vedas are divided broadly into two sections. The first section is what you call Karma Kanda, and the second section is called the Jnana Kanda. The Karma Kanda section of the Vedas are divided into Mantra, Brahmana, and Aranyaka. And the Jnana Kanda section of the Vedas is what you refer to as the Upanishad or the Vedanta. Right? So when we talk about Vedanta, we are referring to the Upanishad or the knowledge, the philosophical portion of the Vedas. That's Vedanta. Okay. So this is a very quick overview. And now we look at Vedanga. Don't mistake that for Vedanga. Vedanta, I'm sorry. Vedanta and Vedanga are two different things. The Vedanga, Anga means limbs. So the limbs of the Vedas are six in number, the six auxiliary limbs, and they support the understanding of the other areas of the Vedas. So first you have Siksha, which is called phonetics, or phonetics is Shiksha, whichever way you want to look at it. Then you have Kalpa, which are the ritualistic portions. It helps you understand how the rituals are performed. You have Vyakarana, which is grammar. Nirukta, the etymology, how words are formed, and so on and so forth. Chandas is the meter. And Jyotisha, which is what you loosely call astrology, though I don't like the term itself. Let's stick to Jyotisha. So one example of Chandas is like you have the Gayatri Mantra, right? So the Gayatri Mantra is not the name of the mantra itself, it is the name of the Chandas, the name of the meter. That's why the same Gayatri Mantra, there is a Gayatri for every Devata. For example, for Shankar Bhagwan, the Gayatri is Tat Purushaya Vidmahe Mahadevaya Dhimahi Tanno Rudrah Prachodayat, right? So this sounds like the so-called Gayatri that we are very familiar with. So the other chandas would be Anushtup Chanda. How the Gita is chanted, how the Mahabharata and Ramayana are chanted are the Anushtup Chanda. Dharma Kshetre Kurukshetre Samaveta Yuyutsavaha Mamaka Pandavashchaiva Kimakurvata Sanjaya or Vishnu Sasnam. Vishwam Vishnurvashatkaraha Bhutabhave Bhavatprabhu Bhutakrit Bhutabhritbhavo Bhutatma Bhutabhavanaha. So this is Anushtup Chanda. Like that you have Trishtup Chanda and so on and so forth. So these six Ved Angas, auxiliary limbs, help you in your own understanding and teaching methodology of the Vedas. So this covers the entire topic of Shastra in a nutshell. Any further questions? All
So,
clear?
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
So why is that Vedas are propagated or passed to the next generation only through Shruti? I mean, only through Shravanam.
Because the Vedas form the Shrotriya Parampara, which means that, very good point. So if you look at it, the Vedas, if you compare the intonations, the reading of the Vedas to say Mahabharata or Ramayana, the Sanskrit is different. You have something called classical Sanskrit, which is what came after Panini encoded the language and created these strong grammatical rules and so on and so forth for it. It existed even before Panini, so I rephrase myself a little bit. But Panini sort of formalized it, and then it became known as classical Sanskrit. Of course, Ramayana and so on predate Panini as well. Now, if you look at a verse from the Vedas, right? Let's take the Sri Rudram. So, Om Namo Bhagavate Rudraya, Om Namaste Rudra Utota Ishave Namaha, Namaste Astu Dhanvane Bahubhya Mutate Namaha. So, you see, I'm going up and down like a seesaw. And these are called the swaras. The swaras themselves contain meaning. If the swaras change, the meaning will also change. And because the swaras can only be conveyed orally, therefore Vedas can only actually be passed through an oral tradition, cannot be passed through any other way. Because the intonation is as important as the very words themselves. In fact, the intonation is inseparable from the words because the words are ultimately the sounds. So the sound has certain force of its own. It has Shakti embedded into itself. right? So that way you also have things such as beej mantras. So if you look at Durga Suktam also, you have Durga Devi Gum. So that Devi Gum, the Gum part, that's a bija. But that would not express itself just by writing. It has to be intoned. That is why the Veda, in part, derive the Shakti also from the intonation. So the other thing is that if I leave, let's say I have a tape recorder, or well, sorry, I'm still from the previous generation. If I have an iPod and I leave the Gayatri Mantra on, it will not generate the same effect as an actual person chanting, because the chanting of the Vedas itself enlivens the mantra in some ways. And when that mantra is passed on to the next generation, the Shakti carries along with it. So the Vedas should always be chanted. And the same argument also holds for Puranas, to be honest, but more for the Vedas, because the Vedas can easily be lost. Now, I would also say, when we talk about the Upanishads, some of the Upanishads are chanted with uh, swaras, and some of the Upanishads have lost the swaras because people have forgotten the swaras over time. So that is the important thing. So here's a good research topic for whoever is inclined. Find out which Upanishads have swaras and which don't. It would be a good discussion for the next section or session.
Sorry, what is that? Could you please?
Find out which of the Upanishads still retain the swaras and which of them have lost the swaras. That would be a good research topic just for fun.
Okay.
Okay. So this is the topic of Shastra. Are we good to move on to Q&A or any other clarifications there? I tried to keep it within time today. Okay, let's move to. I guess I'll skip Karishma ji's question. She's not here. Um, okay, so Rasuna ji and Shri Abhi ji will take your questions. So question 7: career goals, passions, and aspirations. How should a dharmi karma yogi view or answer these? Very relevant, especially for those pursuing a career. We opened this satsanga with a discussion on the three Shaktis: Ichha Shakti, Jnana Shakti, and Kriya Shakti. There are some traditions, unfortunately, a few, well, many in the West, but also a few in India, in Bharat, where there is a sort of stigma against aspiration, against desire. Jainism is one example, Buddhism is also a second example. But in Sanatana Dharma, the ichha, the desire, is not considered a bad thing. It is in fact considered an aspect of Devi by herself. And there's a very beautiful thing. Well, okay, I don't want to digress too much, so I'll just focus on the question. But when your actions are in line with dharma, whether it is your career goals or other passions and aspirations you're pursuing, there's nothing wrong in that. The only thing to keep in mind is, are my aspirations in any way rubbing against dharma? If there is a conflict with dharma, then you have to realign your goals to suit those of dharma, or at least to pursue them dharmically. Therefore, your goals must be pursued, but try to align them with dharma. That is what I would really recommend. Otherwise, there's nothing wrong in that. Every person should grow in their life. They should grow personally, they should grow professionally, they should grow spiritually, they should grow in their relationships, they should grow in their abilities, in their understanding of the world, in their understanding of reality. Growth is one of the keystones of being alive. And therefore, that growth sometimes can also take the form of one's career. And it is good to focus on that, because the more we grow, the greater is our ability to contribute. And when we contribute, the growth is accelerated even further. So, this is how a karma yogi should view, well, this is how a dharmi should view these ideas. Now, when you talk about karma yoga, whatever we encounter, whatever we achieve, whatever we pursue is because of Ishvara. The desire comes from Ishvara. The ability to fulfill also comes from Ishvara. The result that is obtained through our own effort also comes from Ishvara. And therefore, everything that we transact within our life is building a very close and inalienable relationship with Ishvara. And therefore, a karma yogi can make great strides in pursuing their own goals in life by keeping Ishvara at the center of them. This is the attitude that one has to pursue them with. Is that clear?
Yeah, Prashanti.
Okay.
Actually, in the context in which I asked this question is when we went to a team lunch in the office. So one of my colleagues was saying in one particular city in North India, nobody focuses on the career. So that was a statement came on. No, I mean nobody has. They just work. They just work, but they do not have higher aspirations and goals. Uh, he said, and then I was thinking about that, like,
Yeah.
and it very narrowly slips between, so somebody has a career goal and they're working so hard about it, and the moment, I mean, if it is not, as you said, if it is not in line with karma yoga, it will always result. The result is not in your hand. How much ever effort you put,
Yes.
you being a good aspirant also might result in a negative result and
Yes.
disappointment. So there I was little confused. So how should one take to a step? Now
So,
you're
so, so here's the thing. You're right. And action, well, results can come in four ways, as Puja Swamiji teaches. First is you get exactly what you want. Second is you get more than what you want, which usually doesn't happen a lot. Third, you get less than what you want. And fourth, you get the opposite of what you want. And so, what I really admire about Puja Swamiji is he puts it forth to us in very relatable examples. So he says, okay, let's say you are taking a bus to go to work, and the first person goes, and he expects the bus to come by 8 o'clock, and he reaches at 7:50, and at 7:50 itself, a bus comes and he reaches work. So that is something better than what he expected. The second person comes, he expects to leave at 8 o'clock, and the bus comes on the dot, sharp at 8 o'clock. And he goes to work. He got exactly what he expected. The third person waits for the bus. The bus has a tire puncture, and so it comes at 8:30. He's late to work, so he got less than what he expected. And the fourth person is crossing the road, and before he gets onto the bus, he gets hit by another car and dies. So he got the total opposite of what he expected. That means that the only thing that is in our control, karma neva vadikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phala hetu bur, right? So basically, karma neva adhikaraste, karma neva, karma alone, adhikaraste. We have adhikara, right, over, not over the actions, not over the fruits of the results. And if you have certain aspirations, you put them into motion. Try as you might. If the timing is correct, you will get the results in one way or the other. And if you don't, rest assured that the result is not wasted. The result is always waiting for it to reap itself and present itself to you. So, what I mean by that is, I plant a seed today. If the season is correct, if the temperature is right, if the climatic condition, the humidity, the water level, the soil, the fertility, if all of these things are appropriate, tomorrow morning when I wake up, I'll see a sprout. If the weather conditions, the climate, all of these things are not right, I wake up tomorrow, nothing. 2 days later, nothing. Maybe after 6 months, I'll see a small sprout. So, therefore, karma are like sowing seeds. If they don't sprout today, they'll sprout tomorrow. If they don't sprout tomorrow, they'll sprout after 10 years. If after 10 years, maybe next life. Because, we don't believe in just one life, right? There's this, amongst millennials, there's a very famous expression, YOLO, you only live once. But we as Hindus don't accept such stupidity. We say that, okay, life is recurring. and actions are stored life after life after life. And it is only Ishvara who knows best when the results fructify and should fructify at the right time. And this arbitrariness, so called arbitrariness, is well governed by the laws of karma that Ishvara manages, because Ishvara only gives us those karmas that are right for us in that situation. Sometimes, even things which are utter disasters in our life, take it for granted that Ishvara did what Ishvara could to ensure that it came at a time, because if it came at a different time, it could have even had worse consequences on you. So, so basically, long and short of it is, when your colleague spoke about that person in that other village where they don't have great career aspiration, that's okay. It is Ishvara who puts the desire to pursue things in our mind, and it's up to the individual to decide whether to pursue them or not. Some people, what I'm saying is, I'm not talking just about career. When I say growth, growth has to take one form or the other. If I want to grow, I may want to grow very quickly in my career, or if I want to grow, I may want to grow very quickly in my knowledge. I may want to spend my whole life studying the Shastra. That doesn't mean I'm inferior or superior to the guy who's doing something else. It just means that Ishvara has given me this mindset to pursue what I want. And somebody else may become a sannyasi, right? Qualified people, like take Swamini Brahma Pragyanandaji. She was very qualified as a clinical psychologist, but she took to sannyasa. Swatma Vidyananda Swamini ji was very qualified. I believe she was a professor in UCLA or somewhere. I don't remember the exact college, but she took to sannyasa. So some people pursue one path, some people pursue a different path. But Ishvara is the one that plants the seeds of these desires, and it is up to us to decide what to do with it. Now, not every desire is legitimate, also, and this is an important distinction. Remember, when I say Ishvara plants the seed of desire, there are certain desires which are wrong. I may desire to hurt somebody, I may desire to kill somebody, I may desire to steal, I may desire to go and commit some fraud. But the Gita, Krishna Bhagavan is very clear by saying that I present myself in the form of dharmic desires in the human mind. It is only the dharmic desires which are a manifestation of Ishvara in the mind that we have to pursue. So that is what we have to keep in mind. And some desires which are adharmic, we have to recognize that they are sprouting not because of Ishvara, but in spite of Ishvara, because of our own wrong thinking, because of our own negative conclusions, because of our own ignorance. And those desires, we have to reason them away. In a reasonable way, we have to put them off. And that itself is a long, long discussion. But we can come to that. But yeah, this is the long and short of it.
Thank you.
Sure. So the next one is accuracy or validity of the Vastu Shastra and Jyotish Shastra. I don't particularly use the word horoscope because that again implies. See, if you look at the newspaper, you open up the newspaper, you'll have the 12 zodiacs, and there will be these predictions and all, right? So horoscope is a Western concept derived ultimately from Bharat. So let me maybe trace back the history a little bit. We've had the Jyotisha Shastra. In ancient India, we have great scientists who used to stare into the cosmos and look and trace the motion of celestial objects. And they would form patterns, and they would come up with formulas. They would come up with algorithms. They would come up with predictions. So in those days, unlike today, the quote unquote the astrology and the astronomy were not two separate subjects, they were one. The very movement of the celestial bodies, the study of those movements, and to trace a pattern, to understand what the pattern was what you call as Jyotisha. Jyotish actually means light, right? Jyotihi. The Jyotihi actually means light. So these celestial bodies give out light when you look at the night sky. That is where the word Jyotisha comes from. So it was a science. It is a science. And how is it valid? Right? So that's the next point. Every single person that is born, there are two dimensions that can be traced: the place of your birth and the time of your birth, space and time. These form the coordinates, right? So if you have a coordinate system, let's say I want to know where Prasunaji is currently. So you will have to provide me four pieces of information. Four pieces of information, okay? Your longitude, your latitude, and your altitude. Three, which are spatial locations, and the fourth is where you are right now, the when part. So the where is defined by the three spatial coordinates, and the when is defined by the time coordinate. To understand the unique event, if let's say you are inviting me for Sanjana's birthday party or Arjun's birthday party, so you say, okay, we have a birthday party. What are the two things that you will send in the invitation? Place and time, right? If you send me just the place, I'll show up at the wrong time, and then you'll all be wondering what the hell I'm doing there. And if you send me the right time with the wrong place, that's also a problem. So I need the place and the time. If you look at every human being's kundali, or at least as a traditional Hindu, we put the place, the time, and the time includes the date as well. Based on the place and time, there is a certain very definite astronomical configuration of the grahas. You talked about the navagrahas, right? So they are the ones that influence the most. The navagrahas have a certain astronomical configuration at that exact place at that exact time of your birth, and based on that, they mark certain events and they trace certain patterns that one can expect to happen in their lives. You see, this is what it is. So it is not that the grahas are actually exerting some sort of an influence on you. Rather, the grahas are tracking a pattern which determine, which form a correlation between the microcosmos, which is the individual, and the macrocosmos, which is the whole Jagat. And because nothing in this whole Jagat is separated, the macrocosm and the microcosm correspond with each other. And the study of this correspondence is what you call Jyotish Shastra. So, a very simple example is if you're riding down the road, if you're driving rather, and you see that your fuel gauge is blinking red, so it's empty. It is not that the gauge has turned your fuel to empty, it is an indication that your fuel is running out. Same way, if you stop at the traffic signal, it is not that the red sign is making the cars stop and the green is making the cars go. Rather, the red and the green are indications that the cars are going to stop and they are going to start. Right? So, same way, the astronomical configuration are indicating certain events that befall an individual born under that configuration. And that is the science, the very essence of Jyotish Shastra. So it's very valid. And I don't want to cite specific instances, but I have consulted very great acharyas, including Pujya Swamiji. What more could I ask for? For a reading of my Kundali. And, all I can say is he was spot on. Whatever Swamiji said turned out to be exactly as he said it. So there is a certain element of science there, and there's a certain element of intuition also. The same configuration read by different Jyotishas can lead you to different results, right? So you could have one person who is not very accomplished as a Jyotisha and somebody who is very accomplished. And that is why you sometimes have to read between the lines. And that reading between the lines requires a deep intuition and a sort of profundity in one's experience with the Shastras and in one's own sadhana and one's own siddhi. It takes a certain amount of siddhi to be a good Jyotisha as well. Another hallmark of a good Jyotisha, of a legitimate Jyotisha, is they will not charge you a fee. Jyotish Shastra, before you take to its study, you have to say a vow. You have to recite a vow. I don't know what it is, but basically, I will not charge a fee for my services. It is not a profession. It is not something that you turn into a service that you charge a fee for. It only works on Guru Dakshina basis. So if you encounter a Jyotisha who is charging a fee, that person, even if they have studied their whole life, they will not be legitimate sources to go to. Okay, same thing with Vastu Shastra. I'm a little less aware of the details of this, but again, it relates to the similar principles. So, for example, you should not sleep with your head facing the north. right? Your mandir should either be in the southern, sorry, not southern, the northern end or the eastern end of the house. The Shivlinga, the yoni has to face a certain way. You have to eat in a certain direction, so on and so forth. So all of these things have a lot of relevance, and we, at least at our place, we try to keep things vastu compliant. We make sure that our bed and everything is facing the right direction, the mandir is in the right direction, the door, right? The door has to, when we talk about Vastu Shastra, you are imagining yourself in the center of the house, and all the directions are from you at the center. So the door has to be either east or in the north. If the door is facing east, then it brings about material prosperity. If the door is facing north, it brings about adhyatmic, so-called spiritual prosperity. If it faces south, it is a bad idea. You should probably get another house. So these things matter. At least I accept them because they are there in the Shastras. Any questions on that before I breeze through the others?
These are the subjects uh, which have lost their value over generations, and today it is just a business. There are many teachers, we can't even call them as teachers, purely
Yes.
business people.
Yeah. If you find any website or any source where they give you Vastu consultation, Jyotisha consultation, don't go to them, because even if they have the skill, they will not have the intuition. That intuition matters a lot. So if it's a business, it doesn't work. It can't work that way. So the ninth question is how Sanatana Dharma turned into Hinduism. Well, long story, but let me summarize. Uh, the word Hindu actually comes from the word Sindhu. If you look at ancient India, does it even want me to go into details of this, like how things evolved and stuff, or just a summary? I don't mind.
Actually, you recently posted one FB post where Puja Swamiji has explained
Yeah.
very, very nicely. Yeah, if everyone has gone through that post, we really don't require
Okay.
this.
So then I can summarize it since I've already posted about it. Okay. The Persians don't have the letter S. They have the letter H. They replace S with H. It's a transformation. So the people living to the south and east of the river Sindhu, following a set of ancient traditions of derived from the Vedas, they refer to these people as the Hindus. From Sindhu turned into Hindu. Um, Now we stuck around with that name because that's how we are as people, unfortunately or fortunately, or with whichever way you want to look at. We allow ourselves to be defined from the outside. We don't define ourselves from the inside. But I'm not critical of the word Hindu because it has stuck with us for uh, thousands of years, at least 2000 years, or at least 1800 years, whatever, I don't know. It's okay. We stick with it. But that's how Sanatana Dharma, the people who are practicing the tradition of Sanatana Dharma, were referred to as the Hindus by the Persians. So that's how it became Hinduism. Well, now the ism part I have a problem with. I don't have a part with Hindu. I call myself a Hindu. I have a part with ism. I don't like isms. I think isms have spoiled the world. You have communism, you have socialism, you have capitalism, you have consumerism, you have materialism, and then you also have Hinduism. Ism means it's crystallized, it's ossified, it's calcified, it's unchanging, it is like set in stone. Whereas when you talk about dharma, it is like water, it flows and it ebbs and it tides and it moves and it rides, and it has uh, so much movement and so much leg room, so to speak, to extend outwards and to reformulate itself in different ways, right? So I don't like the idea of Hinduism because it again gets classified as a quote unquote religion, whereas Sanatana Dharma contains the aspects of religion but even goes above and beyond that, right? So that itself can turn into a 1 hour satsanga, but that's how it turned into Hinduism. Okay. The recent attacks on Sanatana Dharma, how should one confront them? Well, interesting that you say this because it just yesterday or 2 days back, Mamta Banerjee, the chief minister of Bengal, put 7 to 10 people in jail for chanting Jai Shri Ram on the streets. That's how bad the situation is. You chanting Jai Shri Ram and you get slapped with a legal penalty, which is absolutely pathetic. So I think the only way to confront them is speaking about them, to confront them publicly. Look, I've said this before, I'll probably say it till I die. Hindus are not doing a good job of standing up for themselves, and they don't do a good job projecting themselves in the public domain. We do a terrible job at that. We don't have these discussions with our friends. We don't have these discussions with our colleagues. We are somehow shy of the identity as a Hindu. But if you look at, most Christians or most Muslims, they will at least know some verses from their scriptures. I can't expect most Hindus to know that also. At least not the ones I've encountered, and maybe my sample size is low. But yes, based on what I've seen in the public domain at least, we don't have good representatives in the media, we don't have good representatives in politics, in journalism, in book writing, in none of these soft so called humanities and liberal arts. We don't have any representatives there at all. And it is unfortunately, or for whichever way you want to look at it, it is usually these liberal arts and humanities fields which form the consensus of the direction in which culture should move. And because we are so underrepresented and at times even poorly represented and badly represented in the humanities and liberal arts, these representations leak out into pop culture and they form part of the cultural narrative about who Hindus are. And so the fact that we don't do enough to first A, educate ourselves, and second, share our insights with other people is the reason why Sanatana Dharma gets used, or not Sanatana Dharma per se, but Hindus get put on the back foot. And the only way to confront these things, or I would say rather to deal with them, is one, we have to educate ourselves. And two, we have to spread the teachings in a way where people are open to listening. So that doesn't mean that we evangelize or we proselytize. That is not our culture. This is something that people in the Bible Belt do or in the Islamic world do. They will proselytize and they will try to quote unquote spread their tradition or their religion. I am simply saying we should have an open dialogue about who we are, about what we represent, and not shy away from stepping out into the public domain as Hindus. That's all. So that's the best, most efficient way to tackle these things. Of course, there are specifics, but this is a general idea. Aryan invasion theory, different civilizations and their origins. Let me take 7-8 minutes to discuss this, and then I'll try to breeze through the next one as well. Okay. If you look at how different religions around the world have spawned their inception, it takes us to a very interesting scenario. So I'm going back at a time when prehistorical times, before people started discussing linguistics, right? So today when you talk about the Indo-Aryan languages, it's a linguistic tree that people are trying to trace and trying to find out how the linguistic tree has evolved. I'm going back to a much more ancient time. I don't know how many thousands of years. I don't know the precise number. Um, I would recommend a few sources where one can read about it. But here's a summary version. In ancient India, how ancient I don't know when, there used to be different sets of people who used to follow the Vedas. Today, also, as we see, some people are Shaivas, some people are Vaishnavas, some people are Shaktas, some are Ganapatyas, so on and so forth. We have been a very pluralistic civilization in that Sanatana Dharma is probably, not probably, definitely the most colorful tradition existing today in the world, where there is room to to suit every bhakta's individual style of worship based on the Ishta Devta that you lean towards. So even in those days, some people used to worship the Devas, and then there were some people who also used to worship the Asuras. Now, the people who used to worship the Devas generally had a slightly sattvic disposition. They used to have a value for knowledge, for wisdom, for truth, for peace, so on and so forth. Now, the people who used to worship the Asuras were not bad people per se, but they also had a desire for power, for strength, for virility, right? So, somewhat rajasic aspects, which is okay. You need some rajas in life as well. Now, the worshippers of the Devas and the worshippers of the Asuras, they obviously get along better with their own community. This is a fact, right? See, even today, when we talk about it, whether you look at a social division based on wealth, you'll see that wealthy people live together in one neighborhood, and then there will be a poor ghetto, or then you'll have like people of one race in one neighborhood, and then you'll have a ghetto of somebody in a different race. You'll have so on and so forth, right? Unfortunately or fortunately, this is the way life is basically. Whenever there are differences in society, we tend to conglomerate and coagulate together with people who are more like us. So it is obvious that if I'm a Hindu, at least to me, right? I'm not speaking for anybody else, but at least to me, it was obvious to begin with that I would marry another Hindu or I would marry another Indian, and preferably somebody who's a Gujarati because I'm a Gujarati. So we tend, there's nothing wrong in that. We tend to gravitate towards people who are more like us because we have more in common that way. So anyway, Deva worshippers one side, Asura worshippers a little bit on the other side. Slowly, things changed. The Saraswati River dried up. People started moving here and there. The Asura worshippers moved towards the west. That time, when I talk about Bharat Varsha, it included present day India, obviously, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Nepal, uh, Bangladesh, Burma, Afghanistan, Pakistan, parts of Tibet, obviously, Tibet also, yes, um, and a little bit touching Iran to an extent. The Asura worshippers moved towards the land that is occupied today as Iran, that we call Iran. They became the first Parsis. So if you heard of the Zoroastrian tradition, they are the same people who were the Asura worshippers in Bharat. As they separated from the indigenous motherland, they developed a slightly distinct identity of their own, which is what you call Zoroastrianism. If you look at the Zoroastrian Western text, there are many similarities with the Vedas also. They have the same sorts of fire rituals. They also have a word for yajna, which they call yasna. I don't know where they get the S from suddenly, but yeah, it's called yasna. We call the Lord of Death as Yama. They call it as Yema. And they also have the Janoi, the Upanyanam, the thread, the sacred thread that they wear. So all these similarities were there. If you follow the recent news, recent as in last 4 to 5 years, when the ISIS had proliferated, they were killing these Yazidi people. And if you look at the Yazidi people, they were also sort of related to the Indic civilization only. They wore similar clothes like us, they had similar language, linguistic constructs, so on and so forth. Okay, so this is it. Now, the Parsi tradition, obviously, when you've separated from the motherland for multiple generations, there will be certain changes that creep into your own system. So then, obviously, their tradition changed a little bit. Their god became the Ahura Mazda. Now remember, we said they were Asura worshippers, and the S becomes the H. Asura becomes Ahura. So if you look at Wikipedia, also the god of the Parsis is the Ahura Mazda. So that's where the Parsi religion, the Zoroastrians, evolved from. After 1,000 years or whatever, see again, I'm a bit loose on the time periods, and I don't care too much either. Around that region, Judaism developed, and they took in some of the inputs of the tradition of the Zoroastrians. And then Judaism sort of crystallized a lot of these concepts, right? So, for example, we don't believe, we accept. It's sort of belief, right? Because we accept the Vedas as truth. We say that Swarga and Naraka, which is quote unquote heaven and hell, which I don't like using those words because there's a lot of connotations associated with the Abrahamic religions, they are not eternal. Swarga and Naraka are temporary places that you go to expend your karmas. And once your karmas are expended, you come back. And you're born somewhere else, you're like reborn here and there and whatever. Okay. Then first time in towards the end of Zoroastrian traditional uh, evolution and early on in the Judaistic religion, the concept of heaven and hell became crystallized as an eternal place, that you are there for eternity. And then, long story short, around 1,000 or 1,200 years after Judaism, Christianity was formed by basically copy pasting the Jewish Bible. Most people don't know this. When you talk about the word Bible, they think it's Christian. The Bible is actually Jewish. That is what they call the Old Testament. And then the Christians came up with the Old Testament. They were like they said, oh, Jesus is fulfilling some prophecy. There's a whole long katha, a story about that, which I don't want to get into. So they basically copy pasted Judaism, the Old Testament, and they added something quote unquote the New Testament. And then they introduced the story of Jesus. And they further digested the cultural traditions of the native Europeans. For example, Jesus is referred to as the Son of God. So the Son, actually SON, comes from the SUN by digesting the god Sol Invictus in the Roman tradition. There was a Roman religion, a local religion, where they digested Sol Invictus into the personality of Jesus. And like that, they digested many other traditions and sort of integrated a story. They cooked up a story together centered around the personality of Jesus. For example, the Mithras. If you look this up, you have the Mesopotamian traditions. So aspects of Mithras, the Mesopotamian god, which actually comes from the Vedic Mitra, who's a devata, got digested also into Christianity. And then Christianity digested the native tradition of Yule, right? There was a celebration called Yuletide. Yule got digested into Christmas. And then Easter, which was celebrated to mark the passage of spring or the beginning of spring, got marked or got tagged as the resurrection. And then the winter solstice became the birth of Jesus, so on and so forth. Okay, so I don't want to get into the details of it. Then came Islam, which was a copy paste, well, not an exact copy paste as much as Christianity to the Jews, but following within the same tradition of the Abrahamic religion. The first of the Abrahamic religions, the prototype actually, was Judaism, then came Christianity, and then came Islam. Moses was a prophet according to the Jews. Moses was a prophet according to the Christians as well, but Jesus was considered the quote unquote the Son of God, as we talked about how that happened. And then Christianity is like, okay, no, sorry, not Christianity. Islam's like, yeah, sure, we accept Moses as a prophet. But Jesus is not the Son of God. Jesus is also a prophet. And guess what? Muhammad is also a prophet. But then the Muslims, when they came up with Islam, they scratched their head a little bit. What if somebody does this to us now in the future? Because it's happened twice already. What if somebody replaces us? So they're like, oh, by the way, yeah, Muhammad is also a prophet, but he's the last and final prophet. That means there's nobody after him. And therefore, that put an end to the Abrahamic evolution. There are no further religions after Islam. So this is how the different religions have their theory. Now coming to the Aryan migration theory, let me quickly summarize. My God, I've gone so much over time. Sorry. Um, the Aryan migration theory or the Aryan invasion theory basically manipulates the linguistic difference between the Sanskrit family of languages and the Tamil language. We all know, we all understand that Tamil and Sanskrit have different roots because they evolved differently, which is fine. But just because you have a different linguistic tree does not mean you have a different civilizational tree. It doesn't mean that the people themselves are different, right? If you look at the DNA, Indians are Indians. Now somebody will be like, oh, but why are people in southern India having a darker skin? Um, because it's hotter there, because of climate, Because of sunlight, because it's closer to the equator, right? I mean, it's common sense. You get tanned in summer and you get fairer in winter. Even over here, especially in the US, like I am at least 2 shades fairer than I am right now during winter. So there is an evolutionary preference for darker skin in hotter regions because it protects you against the harmful UVA and UVB rays, ultraviolet rays of the sun. And there's a preference for lighter skin in northern parts of the world because the sunlight is more diffused over there, and it if you have dark skin in the north, it actually blocks the production of vitamin D. Okay, so too much melanin will block the production of vitamin D if you have dark skin. And if you have very fair skin, but you are actually in a hot equatorial region, you will get sunburnt like a crisp tomato, which is also bad. And it obviously leads to things such as skin cancer and whatnot. So, therefore, if you look at the US also, when the African Americans were brought as slaves to the US, today, if you see, they are amongst the highest people with vitamin D deficiencies because their skin blocks a lot of sunlight. So, anyway, skin color is not at least when in the context of India, does not refer to separate races. It just means that there are climatic adaptations that take place. That is life. That is how biology works. Okay, so they took the linguistic difference. They tried to extrapolate it as a racial difference, which is absolutely stupid. Second is there was a migration, yes, but they are lying about where the migration took place. The river Saraswati, which is the primary river of the Vedas, dried up about, I don't know, I think 4,500 or so years ago. The Vedas talk about the Sapta Nadis, right? And today also when we have a bath, we refer to the seven Nadis, Ganga, Chimuna, Chiva, Godavari, Saraswati, Narmada, Sindhu, Kaveri, Jalismit, Sadiram, Kuru. So where is the Saraswati? It used to be the chief river, the primary river of the Vedas. The rishis at the banks of the river Saraswati intuited the very truth of the divine cosmos. And that river dried up. And if you look at towards the end of the Mahabharata, and if you look at the Puranic times, the river is drying up. And then today, the satellite imagery reveals where the river flowed through. There's archaeological evidence for it, so on and so forth. But it's dried up. When the river dried up, every great civilization is formed on the banks of a river. After the Saraswati was gone, people started moving towards the west, from Bharat to Bharat, from India to India only, but from the western part of, eastern part of India to the western part of, I'm sorry, from western part of India to the eastern part of the India. And that is where the Ganga, the great Gangama that we worship today, became the primary river. So if you see, the primary river of the Puranas is Gangama, and the primary river of the Vedas is Saraswati. So the migration happened from India to India, from Saraswati to Ganga, but then they use that small trace of subcontinental migration as evidence for an outside migration, which is completely absurd. Okay, two things, right? So we talked about the linguistic and the racial, three things: linguistic difference. Second is we talked about the skin color. Third, we talked about the migration from the rivers. Now the fourth thing: why are they trying to basically push this theory so hard? And this all takes us back to a very important topic. Um, when the British captured India, they needed a very good excuse to retain power. So, one of the ways to retain power is by showing that what we are doing is not any worse than what you've already done before. So, they said, "Hey, you stupid Indians, we are here to civilize you and we are here to tame you. You are barbaric. But don't worry, you have done this to the native Indians in the past. We are only doing it to you again." That means you, so called fair skinned Indians, invaded India in the past and pushed the dark skinned Indians to the south. And we are going to do the same thing to you. So what's so different, right? We are only repeating the historical precept that you have formed. So that was a very good excuse strategy. So in order to justify that, a lot of Indologists, especially those employed by UK and Germany in those days, started concocting this whole race theory. One branch of the race theory, unfortunately, based on the German concoction of it, became the Aryan supremacy of the Nazis. Right? So this is where the consequences lead to. Anyway, that's how the theories were formed. I think I've gone too much into detail on this, but I think it was important as well. So, final question. I'm sorry I went so much over. Any thoughts before the last one? All good? Okay. Last one. Sri Ambi. So, on idol worship. So, I prefer actually using the word Murti Puja. And let's explain the significance of it. First significance is that the part represents the whole. So let's say, Abhi, that you are calling Sanjana, and she has earphones on, so she's listening to some music very loudly, and so she doesn't hear you. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you invoke her? You might tap her on the shoulder, you might tap her on her head, you might tap her on her arm, right? Some
Yeah.
way or the other, you will tap her on some part of her body to invoke her attention.
Right.
If you have to invoke Sanjana as a whole, you're not going to touch her whole body, you're just going to touch a part of it, like even a small finger will do. So same way, the whole Jagat is a manifestation of Ishvara, but through the Murti, through a part, through an aspect of the Murti, you can invoke the whole. Through the part, by invoking the part, you're invoking the whole. Just as by invoking Sanjana's finger or her shoulder, you're invoking her whole. So that is one basic idea. Second is, if you look at a Murti, every aspect of it denotes a certain aspect of reality also. So let's take Shankar Bhagwan. Or are you familiar with Dakshinamurti?
Yes, yes.
So if you see Dakshinamurti, who's a form of Shankar Bhagwan,
Mm-hmm.
uh, he represents both male and female, right? So if you see one earring of Dakshinamurti,
Mm-hmm.
it is a longer earring, the other is short. The longer earring represents the feminine half,
Mm-hmm.
the short earring represents the masculine
Mm-hmm.
part. Then we also have Ardhanarishwara. Okay.
Then,
Then Dakshinamurti is holding fire in one arm that represents the Agni Tattva. Right? So Agni is one of the five elements. And
mm-hmm.
then there's the bandana that is the hair is tied up by the bandana which represents the Vayu Tattva. And then there's a Dabru, right? Shankar Bhagwan usually holds a Dabru that represents the Akash Tattva. And then there's ash that's smeared on the body of Shankar Bhagwan, which represents the Prithvi Tattva, the earth. And then if you look at these moving from Dakshinamurti to even Shankar Bhagwan, right? Ganga is flowing in the head. I forgot if it's the left part of the head or the right part, but Ganga Ma flows through the braids, through the hair, through the locks of Shankara Bhagwan. And so that represents the Jal Tattva, right? The Apaha. And then you also have the Chandra. There's a moon that is entangled in his locks as well. The moon represents time, that represents Kala Tattva. And so, the whole body of Ishvara represents an aspect of the entirety, of the whole reality. But now there's one I left out. What about the Atma? What about the individual? Right? Where is that represented in Ishvara? The one who is worshipping Ishvara, the individual, represents the Atma Tattva. The one who is forming the image, who has a conscious image of Ishvara, is the Atma Tattva. So the whole Jagat is represented through forms of Ishvara. So that is why you also do Murti Puja. That's the second point, right? First is part represents the whole, and second is every aspect denotes an aspect of reality. Third, especially important also, is that the prana pratishtha is performed to concentrate prana in the Murti. Ishvara is obviously all pervading. Sarvam khaluvidam Brahma, Ishavasya sarvam. Jo kuch hai Ishvara hai. All that there is Ishvara. But then what's so special about the Murti itself? The prana pratishtha, the prana shakti of Ishvara is manifest in the entire Jagat, in the whole cosmos. But just as, like, let's take a flame, right? Heat, there's heat everywhere. If you look at the temperature today, it's like what, 78, 82 degrees. So there's heat everywhere. That's why you can take a temperature reading. But the heat is most manifest in a flame. Same way, air is everywhere, but the air is most manifest in a tornado or a hurricane. Same way, the prana shakti is everywhere, but it is most concentrated upon the performance of the prana pratishtha puja in the murti of Ishvara. And therefore, an aspect of Ishvara is concentrated in greater proportion within the murti where the prana pratishtha is performed. So that is the third reason for worship. Now I'll give the final reason. Even if, okay, as though you're limiting Ishvara to just the murti. Let's say you don't have the above understanding at all. Okay, you don't understand that the part represents the whole. You don't care about it. You don't understand the aspects of reality represented through Ishvara. You don't even know what the hell is Prana Pratishtha. You have no idea. For you, that Murti alone is Ishvara and you don't care about anything. So what? That is also good. It gives you a lot of stability in your life as well. So let me share an incident. And Anusha, if you are hearing, you'll also find this interesting because it's relating to Swamini Swatma Vidyantaji, who you obviously know. So once there was a satsanga that Swamiji was holding, and there was a mother who used to come there, and she told Swamiji that Swamiji, would you like to meet my son? So Swamiji said, yeah, sure, bring him tomorrow. So okay. So the next day, the lady came, showed up for the satsanga, and she was sitting there, but there was nobody. So, matlab, as in Swamiji did not see anybody with that lady. She came by herself. So Swamiji was obviously curious. After a while, after the end of the satsanga, the mother went up to Swamiji and said, Swamiji, actually my son is sleeping in the other room, but if you're not too busy, we can go and meet him. So Swamiji said, yeah, sure, why not? She was obviously curious, like, what's going on. So she accompanied the lady to the other room, the adjoining room. And then the room was completely empty. So now Swamiji is really wondering. The lady said, speak softly. My son is just waking up right now. And then she opened her purse and took out a small murti of Balakrishna. And so Swamiji was very touched, like she was very touched by this gesture. And the lady said that actually my son, when he was very young, he died in a car accident. And I could not cope with that grief, but then I recognized to see my son and Ishvara in my son. And so wherever I go, I take this murti with me and I worship it also, as though it is my son. So that becomes one bhav of worshipping Ishvara. Vatsalya bhava it is called. And this is so beautiful, it is so touching. Right? It brings tears to your eyes because the lady had two options, either to live with that grief and be completely traumatized by it, or to somehow introduce Ishvara into the equation and come to terms with it. And she came to terms with it because Ishvara played a critical and primary role in her life. And she took Ishvara along with her wherever she went, and Ishvara took her along with him as well. And so this is the beauty of reaching out to Ishvara, of invoking Ishvara through a form, because you can relate to that form. You relate to the form as your father. So you say Jagat Pitaro Shiva. You can relate to that form as your mother, right? So you say Mata, Saraswati, Parvati, Durga. She's your mother. You relate to that form as your child, as Krishna. You relate as your friend. You relate as your guru, Dakshinamurti. So this relationship with Ishvara, I would argue that besides a strong commitment to dharma, it is the relationship with Ishvara and that understanding of Ishvara through the various forms available to us is what is most important to a Hindu. Forget the Upanishads if you've not studied it, is okay. Forget the Vedas if you've not recited them, it's okay. But if you form a relationship with Ishvara, a relationship of pure, unconditional bhakti, then I think 95% of the way you're already through. Only that 5% of it will remain. That's it. So this is the relevance of Murti Puja, of how significant it is. So any thoughts? Else we can conclude today's satsanga.
Thank you, Prashant.
Oh, no problem. So okay, let's recap next month. So what date will be? So today is the first. What's the first Saturday of next month? It's I
Sixth.
leave it up to y'all. Do you want to do it on 29th June or do you want to do it on 6th July?
Uh, Sixth. Oh, that's the long weekend, right?
Yeah, yeah. So do you want to do it on 29th June?
29th, yeah.
Okay. So next time we'll recommence on 29th June. Okay. Om Sadashiva Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Padyantam Vande Guru Paramparam Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnaat Purnamidachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Shri Om Namaste.